Is coffee good for our eyes? Let's find out. Welcome to Your Eye Show, brought to you by DeliverContacts.com and DeliverSmartGlasses.com. I'm your host, Optometrist Dr. Ed Wallington, and today's video, we're going to talk about coffee. We're not going to talk about caffeine. We are going to talk about caffeine, but my point is coffee does not equal caffeine. Caffeine is but one single ingredient to coffee, perhaps only 1% of the coffee bean. If we take coffee to encapsulate the entire coffee bean, then we're going to miss all the good stuff, okay? Coffee is so much more than just caffeine. Many of you actually only enjoy coffee for that caffeine effect, that neurostimulant effect that keeps us awake and alert. A lot of us don't even like the taste of coffee. So what do? We put milk in it, we put sugar in it, or artificial sweeteners. We mask the bitterness, and we ultimately mask the health benefits of coffee as well when we put all that stuff in. Okay, chances are if you're that person that puts all those different ingredients into your coffee, you probably actually haven't had a good cup of coffee yet. So if your only focus is the caffeine, then you're going to miss out on all those extra flavors that good specialty coffee can bring and all those extra health benefits that are in coffee. Okay, and that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about how we can make the most out of our coffee and get those flavors and what health benefits that we can get from them. So we'll talk about caffeine, but let's set caffeine aside for a little while so we can focus on the coffee. And before we go in, I want to send some love out to our biggest fan, DJ. DJ watches all of our shows over and over again, and he actually stopped by, and I made him a V60 pour over using White Pine Coffee Roasters Rwanda Microlot single origin coffee, and it has notes of blackberry, subtle cocoa, and candy light sweetness. Okay, that doesn't mean that those things are added to the coffee. That's just the flavors that you can taste inside the coffee. I don't think DJ ever had a coffee like this before, but he said he liked it. Thank you, DJ, for your support. So let's start off with the growing stage. Coffee is generally grown in tropical areas at high elevations where there's lots of moisture and cooler nights. That's why you're only going to find coffee in certain areas. The coffee cherry itself, in the early stages, it tends to be green, and then it turns red when it's ripe. Where coffee is grown, the environment, the location, the temperatures, elevation that it's at, all those things actually play a role in what the flavor of the cherry is like. Different cherries that are grown on coffee plants, throughout the world are going to have different flavors. Just like an apple, different apples have different flavors to them, right? Well, guess what? Coffee beans actually have different flavors to them too. Okay, they're all grown in different plants and different varieties of coffee plants all over the world at different levels, elevations, and picked at different times. All these different things contribute to the flavor of a coffee. When the coffee bean is just a seed, it doesn't have any flavors yet. Next thing they have to do is harvest. During harvesting, they take the coffee cherries off the tree, they let them dry out, and then they take the green seeds out of the coffee cherries. And they're not called seeds, they're now called green coffee beans, but they don't have any flavor. In order to get the flavor out of the coffee bean, you actually have to roast it. But before we get to roasting, we got to talk about processing. And to help me with the processing, I reached out to White Pine Coffee Roasters, and they helped me out. Their owners, Brad and Bryan, welcomed me into their facility. They taught me a bunch of stuff. They showed me how coffee is actually roasted, and Brad actually sat down to a very long interview.
My name is Brad Kobeck. I'm one of the owners of White Pine Coffee Roasters. We are located in Oxford, Michigan. We are a purveyor and roaster of specialty coffees only, all Arabica beans, roasted in-house. We have about 80 different wholesale partners around Metro Detroit, and we ship retail beans all across the United States.
Processing is the stage where commodity coffee is separated from specialty coffee. Okay, the difference is that commodity coffee is the coffee that's made for the masses. It's the low quality, generic tasting coffee. Okay, specialty coffee is that high quality with all those special flavors
So specialty coffee versus commodity coffee. Commodity coffee, you're basically buying off an exchange at a market rate, and think of it as a widget. There isn't much difference between one coffee from one region, and flavor notes aren't as big of a deal. The quality and defects that are in those beans are usually not highlighted or paid attention to as much. So the specialty roasting industry, especially coffee industry we're in, on a scale of 100, the coffees have to get to 80 points, and they actually start at the high numbers, and you take away points as there are defects. So we only source, say, 82s, 83s for our blends, and then our single origins, we 85s, 87s, occasionally an 88 or an 89.
In order to be considered specialty coffee, you have to have certain harvesting standards. Okay, it's just, for example, you have to be ethical, you have to be environmental, you have to be sustainable, you have to have a certain level of fair trade in order to be even considered for a specialty coffee title. Right? The bean qualities themselves are actually evaluated over 10 different criteria. Start with the 100, and they check your bean qualities, and if you get 80 or more, then you meet that requirement of being specialty coffee.
So specialty coffee is still growing by big percentage points each year, but it's still only like 5 to 7% of the U.S. coffee market. So although it keeps growing and there are a lot of independent roasters out there, it's still a pretty small, it's not a new industry, but it's still a pretty small industry percentage-wise.
Once it gets to the roasters, each of the roasters has to define how they're going to roast their particular bean. When they get these beans, they put them in the hopper. From the hopper, it goes down into the drum, and then it spins around and heats up the beans. And the green beans are just absorbing heat, and they're getting hotter and hotter. And the roaster's got to watch that temperature and heat it up at a certain speed until the bean doesn't want to absorb anymore. It all of a sudden, the oils and the flavors all of a sudden just want to come out, and they start snapping. That's called first crack. You can actually hear the different beans cracking throughout. But it's at that point, at first crack, where all of a sudden the flavors are starting to be released. Okay, it's at that point where that green coffee bean turns more of a tan, and the roaster will continue to watch the color and watch the heating profile as the bean continues to roast. At different levels, different flavors come out, and an experienced roaster will understand that bean and know what flavor they're going for. And once they hit a certain mark, they're going to take that bean and they're going to empty it into the cooling tray so that bean will have the flavor that they want. All right. So again, the green coffee bean goes from green to tan at first crack, and then it goes to more of like a light brown, and then a medium brown, and then brown to dark brown to even a black. From tan to brown is where you're going to find the most flavors available for a coffee bean. And that's where specialty coffees tend to stay, where all those flavors are. The coffee bean continues on down, the flavor margins become tighter, the bookends get a little bit narrower, and goes more towards the bitter flavors and less flavors available. What actually constitutes the flavor of a coffee? We can use all of our senses to experience coffee. When you're grinding beans, you can actually smell the coffee, or you can hear the coffee as you're pouring it, or see the color. The temperature of a coffee makes a difference in how you may experience that flavor. Different coffees will have textures to them that will add to our brain's perception of what that flavor is.
Those molecules, when it tastes like a tangerine or it tastes like an apricot, it is literally locking into the same receptor that actual chemical would for your palate or in your brain, whatever sensory input we're talking about. Those, like I say, it tastes like chocolate a little bit or caramel. It is functionally using the same receptor to trigger that experience. Now, there's usually, I'm not a chemist, so I'm not going to pretend to get this terminology right. There's usually a carbon missing or a bond that's different, something like that. They're not facsimiles of each other in the sense that they're the same. They're just so related that they can still lock into the same receptor in your nervous system and still trigger the same response. Now, that is not at all related, and we just want to get it off the table. That's not flavored flavored by us artificially or through anything natural. That is the giant toolkit of flavors that are in coffee naturally. There are certainly flavored coffees out there. Those are mostly going to be commodity, and then you have barrel aged where they literally put them in old whiskey barrels and stuff like that. Those are all after the fact additives to coffee. They're not inherent in the coffees themselves. But for us, yes, those we get some wild flavor notes too every once in a while. Like right now, what do we got on the table? Rwanda. That has to my nose, that has almost a freeze-dried strawberry note aroma, but yet when it brews, it tastes like a blackberry. And you had a small sample this morning, and just giving a little acknowledgement to brewing is difficult. I even acknowledged the one for my palate, the one we had this morning. It was a little overbrewed and it was a little bit sour compared to what I've had previously out of that coffee. Every time you brew coffee, it's going to, especially when you start going after these very esoteric single origins with wild flavor notes that are honestly a little sometimes difficult to brew depending on your brewing method. That we did on a specialty brewer, but it was a batch brew, so a larger brew. Once you start doing pour overs and espresso shots and really start dialing in, you can really refine and narrow what flavors you're going after. Versus if you're on an auto drip pre-programmed brewer, you're kind of accepting the flavor notes that water temperature delivered at that say hardness level for your minerals in the water, what that would deliver. But I'm always cautious to tell people to go down the rabbit hole of espresso and pour over as well, because it is a learning curve, and not everyone needs a new hobby that takes over 5 hours of their lives, but per week basically. But what I want to get at is that's not necessary to enjoy it and to get the benefits, both the esoteric and the actual kind of say health and lifestyle benefits that specialty coffee can provide. You don't need to learn everything to actually gain the benefits of it.
In the end, it comes down to the taste, the flavors that are on your tongue. But your tongue and your smell are tightly tied. So first thing you do before you taste any coffee is smell it. Bring in those flavors with the smell, and then give it a taste to experience the coffee. Now, I am not good at this right now. Good coffee tasters can tell you a lot more about how to drink a coffee. But the cool thing is I am inexperienced. And gosh, it's fun. All my life I've been having regular coffee, just the coffee from a K-cup or from drip coffee. And I thought that was coffee. But sure enough, yeah, I was adding cream and I was adding sugar. I was never really tasting the coffee. Once I found specialty coffee, well, it opened my eyes to what real coffee tastes like. And that's what I'm hoping for you. If you really haven't enjoyed or experienced good coffee your entire life, find specialty coffee. After the coffee is roasted, the next thing that needs to be done is it needs to be ground. But before you actually grind the coffee, you actually have to get it from somewhere. Buy it as a whole bean, because a coffee will lose taste very fast as soon as it's ground. So you want to buy whole bean coffee from a specialty roaster.
I cannot stress enough that you want to buy whole bean and probably use it within, 2 weeks is really good. A month is acceptable. After that, you start getting some staling and some VOC. You start those nice volatile organic compounds we were talking about, those flavor notes earlier. Those are going to start dissipating and disappearing on you.
There's going to be some terminology that's on the bag that's going to tell you that it's either single origin, micro lot, or blended. Single origin will mean that it's generally one location. When it says micro lot, they're still talking about single origin, but it just means a small batch from one location.
You will get micro lots and single origins. Those are both independent terms that kind of overlap. A single origin, different roasters, different consumers, different trade organizations will have different concrete or defined characteristics of that. For us, a single origin, at its widest definition, at the very least, it's from the same region. It may have different members of the same co-op providing different beans to that same single origin, and it may be different genetics as well. You may have two different subspecies of Arabica in that. That's the widest net. Now, you will have some, I don't want to say they're better or worse, but ultra-specific roasters, that they would not agree with that definition. For them, that's too broad. So they're going to want to say single farmer, single genetic variety, processed basically on the same day in a very cohesive batch. And that's more of a data point thing than almost anything else. And not that it doesn't relate to cup quality or a cohesiveness of the final product, but a lot of it's also business practices, marketing, and getting that extra 2% of uniqueness out of a product. Very often, there is a usefulness and a final attribute in the cup that will come across that's more unique, but you have to roast it great, you have to grind it correctly, and certainly you have to brew it correctly. Because as complicated as the supply chain is for specialty coffee, I always say it's a miracle there are amazing cups of coffee for all the different dynamic processes that are going on within the industry.
The term blended beans generally means that there's various beans from different locations. They might take this flavor of bean from this location, this flavor of bean from this location, this flavor of bean from this other location, and put them all in one bag so that the consumer can experience all those flavors in one cup of coffee.
We don't do like the 7 bean mega blend scenarios here, where the most beans that are in any of our blends are 3. And then our light roast blend is only 2, and it's usually a Latin American and then a South American component in that. Shanty Boy, medium roast house blend. Again, I referenced kind of a wide demographic funnel a couple times. Our Shanty Boy house blend, our medium roast, we really kind of focus in on medium roasts. We go a little lighter, a little darker occasionally, but for the development of the sugars in the medium roast, that's what we are going after here at White Pine Coffee Roasters. This one is always a Brazil natural, a washed Ethiopian, and then usually a washed Costa Rican as well. So I always say that the Brazil will provide some sweetness. The Ethiopian will get you a depth and a breadth of flavor, and the Costa Rican is what's going to supply kind of the notes of chocolate and caramel that are present in our champagne. Our blends that we're sourcing compared to a commodity blend, they're going to have way more nuanced genetics in there to pull out of that what you're looking for. A commodity blend, it's just not going to have the complex set of different VOCs. VOCs in some industries is a horrible thing, or I shouldn't say horrible, a negative attribute, like paint. You don't want a lot of VOCs when you're painting your house. Car industry, off-gassing materials, VOCs, those aren't good things. But when you're talking about culinary and food world and coffee world, VOCs, volatile organic compounds, those are good attributes. So the specialty, the set of flavor attributes that is available or potential in specialty coffee dwarfs that of commodity. Also in commodity, you're going to have more mold problems, toxin problems, bacterias, things like that. They don't roast as evenly, that they're not as dense in general, a commodity bean, so they don't roast as evenly, and you just can't, the toolbox, the palette just isn't there to be able to create the nuanced flavors you want.
So to get your coffee from White Pine Coffee Roasters, go to whitepinecoffee.com and put in code YourEyeShow, WPCR, which stands for White Pine Coffee Roasters, YourEyeShow, WPCR, to get an awesome discount on their specialty coffee. So next comes the grinding. Okay, this is super, super important. And I had to do some learning on what grinder to get too. Okay, so you should only get a burr grinder. Never get the blades that chop. The blades will just make a mess of the size of the coffee bean when it cuts it up, and you're not going to be able to extract the flavors that you want out of your coffee when you make it. So you have to get a burr grinder. What a burr grinder will do is it'll help you grind the coffee beans into the size that you want them. What grinding does is it unlocks the flavors. Think of that coffee bean as having flavors inside. The more surface area that's exposed, the more flavors that water can extract from those coffee grounds. Coffee grounds, when you're grinding them, they have to go anywhere from what's considered a coarse or thicker type grind size to a finer size. So this is part of the art form that you're going to have to put in, that you're going to have to figure out when you're making coffee, figuring out the grind size to get the best flavored coffee makes a huge difference.
But realize an hour after grinding a bean, you lose about 75% of the available aromatics that are in a bag, in a bean. And that could either be to the palate or aroma. So VOCs, both your nose, which is a lot of what you're tasting anyways. People, most people are up on that. But so to really gain the aesthetic and the nuanced taste scenarios from a specialty coffee, you want to grind it right before you use it.
Different methods of brewing actually bring out different flavors out of coffee grounds. There's three main ways that you can brew your coffee: immersion brewing, infusion brewing, or pressure brewing. Immersion brewing is when you actually have your coffee grounds and then you just pour hot water into it. There's two methods that actually constitute that. The main method for immersion brewing is what's called the French press. With the French press, you have to grind your coffee more coarse, so your coffee grounds are bigger. The time that coffee grounds stay in the water are going to take those flavors out. Another form of immersion coffee brewing is the AeroPress. You just pour much finer grounds in with the water. With the AeroPress, you press the water through the grounds to extract those flavors. Their two different immersions even taste a lot different. The next form of brewing is called infusion. My two favorite ways are the Hario V60 and the Chemex. The infusion method is where you actually put a filter in there. You put the coffee into a filter and then you pour your coffee through. And what's very important with V60 method or the Chemex method is that you do something called blooming. Okay, what blooming is when you pour your hot water into the coffee grounds and then you let the coffee sit for a little bit. About 30 to 45 seconds is the wait time to let gases escape. There's a lot of CO2 that's in coffee grounds, and when you first apply water to it, the water is absorbed and the CO2 will escape. Okay, now if you keep pouring water, then you're not going to allow that CO2 to escape. And it's important to let that CO2 escape because that CO2 will block the water from extracting some of those flavors, and it'll also provide a sour taste to your coffee if you don't let it escape. The traditional drip coffee is also considered an infusion method. Think about what a drip does. It just pours it through. It's not going to take such care of your brewing process. The next form is pressure brewing. The AeroPress is an immersion form, but it's also a pressure because you're forcing pressure through. Another pressure brewing that you can do right at home is through the mocha pot. And mocha pot is using pressure of heated water to go up through the ground. Pressure is forcing hot water through coffee grounds and into a pot. But the most popular pressure brewing method is the espresso. The espresso needs a high pressure machine to force a certain amount of water through very fine grounds to get the flavors that you're looking for. A couple of my favorite YouTube channel coffee experts that I turned to when I was learning how to brew coffee were James Hoffman and The Coffee Chronicler. Both those guys have some excellent videos teaching you how to make good coffee using various brewing methods. I'll have a couple of links in the notes so you can find them really easy if you want to go there. Before we get on to our next phase of the video though, I want to kind of touch on what espresso is too in how it's often drank. Okay, sometimes espresso is drank in a little shot or in two shots that we'll call a double shot or even a triple shot to make sure you get more espresso in it. There are different drinks out there that are quite often confusing because you see them on a board at a coffee shop and you might go, well, what's the difference between this and that? Oh, that one's has milk and that one has milk too. All right, so I'm going to put up a quick list here, so check it out and I'll read them off to you. An Americano is an espresso with extra hot water added in to make the espresso not so strong. The macchiato is an espresso with an added dash of milk and a dash of foam on top. The cappuccino is your espresso that has more steamed milk and more foam, where a flat white is similar except it has more espresso with steamed milk and no foam. The cortado has equal espresso with equal steamed milk and still no foam. The cafe latte is a double shot of espresso with more steamed milk and foam. The mocha latte is a double shot of espresso with chocolate milk. The affogato is an espresso over ice cream. The lungo is an espresso made with double the amount of water. A ristretto is like an espresso, but finer grains made with half the amount of water. The piccolo latte is actually a ristretto with milk. The red eye is a shot of espresso with regular coffee, where a black eye has a double shot espresso with regular coffee. So now we know about specialty coffee. We know where it comes from. We know how to buy it. We know how to make it. Do we actually know what coffee is? There's not a lot of macronutrients actually in coffee itself, but in the bean there is. A coffee bean has about 15% lipids, 10% proteins, and 50% carbohydrates. When you drink coffee, it says 0 carbohydrates. So that's the coffee. So the carbohydrates don't actually get into the coffee, but there's plenty of carbohydrates in the bean. And that's where a lot of the flavors come out of. There's lots of carbs in here. Remember, this is just a seed to a fruit, and that fruit has a lot of flavors and a lot of sugars around it. Okay, the seed itself has sugars in there as well. So when we're trying to actually get the flavors into our coffee, we use these proteins, these lipids, and these carbohydrates to help us get those flavors out. During the roasting process, as this bean absorbs heat, these macronutrients will start to change. Flavors will be made. New chemical reactions will be made. New smells will be smelled. And when we talk about carbohydrates and amino acids, carbohydrates are the sugars that are part of this bean. Amino acids are the proteins of this bean. When these sugars are broken down into sugary compounds, that doesn't mean that they're going to go into your coffee. It just means that flavors are going to change. Some of them actually may get through and be extracted into your coffee, and that would be what gives you your flavor notes. But for the most part, you're not getting a lot of sugar. You may just get a few of the flavors that seep through, but you're really not getting the sugar going through into your coffee. In the early stages of the Maillard reaction, you're going to find that's where all of your acidic flavors begin. But as the Maillard reaction continues along its way and the caramelization continues and the bean gets darker and darker, the Maillard reaction is going to lose its acidic, its sweet flavors, and again it's going to become more and more bitter as caramelization continues. So caramelization will continue right on down until, like I said, until you have a dark roast and all the acidity, all the sweetness is gone, and you're left with just a very bitter bean.
A lighter roasted coffee, you're looking more for nice elevated acidity. You're not so much focused on mouthfeel at that point. It's acidity and some fruit notes a little bit creeping in there towards the medium range. And then as you develop more towards medium, you're going for coffees that have some mouthfeel. The farther you develop a roast, the more sugars you create and the little more mouthfeel you're going to have as well. So again, the light roast, think of like a breakfast blend, kind of a little bit of elevated acidity, not a ton of mouthfeel, and then medium roast, more body, more of the chocolate and caramel notes. And then by the time you get to a dark roast, you are talking more about the roast note and more body, more mouthfeel. And then depending on the coffee you source, there may be a little bit of a syrupy aspect to the mouthfeel or the body of the coffee.
The different aromatic compounds that are released during the Maillard reaction are right here. There's 3 of them. There's pyrazines, aldehydes, and ketones. The pyrazines are going to give you that nutty roasted smell of coffee. The aldehydes are from the breakdown of the amino acids of the proteins, and they're going to be sweet, fruity, floral notes. The ketones, which are from the fatty acid breakdown, are going to smell more buttery, caramel, and musty. Now again, carbon dioxide is also going to be made during these reactions, but CO2 doesn't actually give off any kind of aroma, but it can affect how your coffee is brewed to bloom your coffee so that that CO2 is released. Okay, that occurs during the Maillard reaction as well. Now there's 4 main non-volatile, meaning non-aromatic substances that actually get into your coffee to give your coffee taste for your tongue. Okay, you got your smells, which also will contribute to the overall flavor, but the actual taste that stimulates your taste buds that actually make it into your coffee, there's 4 main ones that I'll talk to you about that make it into your coffee. One of them is caffeine. Okay, caffeine. Caffeine is more of a bitter taste. And then there's something called chlorogenic acid. Well, caffeine makes up about 1% of the coffee bean. And then there's something else called chlorogenic acid. Now, chlorogenic acid is always found with caffeine. Chlorogenic acid is about 8% of your coffee bean, and it also has a bitter taste. Caffeine is something that actually is produced by plants to defend the plant itself from insects. But the caffeine can damage the plant. So protect the plant from the caffeine, the plants also make the chlorogenic acid to keep the caffeine from hurting it. So you have to have a lot more chlorogenic acid to stop the caffeine from damaging the plant. Another thing that gets into the coffee taste is sucrose. Sucrose is broken down into smaller forms of acids, and then there are also oils that get in there, and the oils give you more of a mouthfeel than actually adding a lot of flavor to it. About 30% of your coffee grounds are soluble in water, but usually after a good coffee brewing, only about 20% of the coffee bean is actually going to get into your coffee. Of that 20%, there are micronutrients that are bioactive that can affect the body. And those some special micronutrients that actually can get into the body are called polyphenols. And polyphenols are all antioxidants. Antioxidants are considered good for the body. I mean, in excess they can be bad, but our body needs antioxidants to help relieve oxidative stress. During regular body processes, our body has free radicals that are byproducts of work that is done inside of our body cells. We have natural antioxidants that actually break those things down. But when something is oxidized, it has free radicals, we need an antioxidant. So anti means opposite, right? So we need something that's opposite of an oxidant. We need an antioxidant to relieve our body of those extra oxidants. When we have extra oxidants, that's called oxidative stress. All right, there's a lot of things that can actually, cause out of oxidative stress. Oxidants are associated with things like aging. Okay, when our body breaks down, a lot of it has to do with that our body can no longer get rid of all of the extra free radicals that are in the body. So tissues start to break down. Oxidative stress is also associated with your diabetes, and antioxidants can actually have a protective mechanism against things like liver damage and cancer and cardiovascular disease and Alzheimer's. Okay, it can have a neuroprotective effect. So antioxidants aren't all that bad. Okay, antioxidants are actually a very good thing. They're associated with a protective mechanism for the entire body. And we have these polyphenols that can actually get into the coffee and make coffee a very strong antioxidant. Now, anything in excess, including coffee, can be too much. Okay, caffeine does have some side effects, and we'll talk about that in a second. But the antioxidant power of coffee is very strong and can serve very beneficial for the body. There's a lot of studies out there about it. There's definitely a beneficial role for coffee in our diets. I'm not telling you to start drinking coffee and use it like a medicine, but what I am saying is that because coffee has all these antioxidants in it, if you are drinking it, it doesn't mean that it's all bad just because it has caffeine, because caffeine itself is one of these antioxidants. The diterpenes that can contribute extra oil that is usually filtered out. If you do the Chemex or the V60 during the brewing process, we'll filter those extra lipids out of the grounds. But if you're doing something like a French press, then you're going to have these extra diterpenes. Again, they do have a nice antioxidant action to them, but they also may increase your LDLs in your bloodstream. So if you have high cholesterol, you might want to avoid making coffee in the form of a French press and go more towards a filter design. Trigonylene provides a lot of the aromas and the flavors that actually get into the coffee. It's an antioxidant, but it's a very friendly flavor for your coffee. Now the caffeine and the acids, those antioxidants, but they're going to be more bitter flavored. So each of them serve a purpose in the body, but in each of them has an antioxidant, but each of them can kind of do something different. For example, like the caffeine, it's a neurostimulant, right? And if you aren't drinking specialty coffee, that's probably why you like coffee so much, is because of the caffeine that's in the coffee. You like that neurostimulation, okay? And the reason that we have this neurostimulation is because what caffeine does in the brain is it blocks adenosine receptors. Okay, what adenosine in the brain is something that as the day goes on, it builds up and it makes us more tired. It makes us less alert. It makes us go to sleep. All right, so if caffeine blocks that which makes us tired, then it's going to wake us up. It's going to make us more alert. Caffeine can improve your performance in sports and stuff like that too. But it's not all that great because caffeine can also interrupt your sleep. So if you're having caffeine before you go to bed, so you're blocking these receptors that actually make you tired, well, then you're not going to achieve the level of sleep that you're supposed to have. And newer studies are definitely showing that people that aren't getting the proper amount of sleep have more risk of cardiovascular disease and diabetes and other problems that are associated with lack of sleep. Caffeine, we may take it because we want to be more alert, but it can affect our overall health if we're not being careful with it. Caffeine has also been shown to increase heart rate and blood pressure by promoting the release of something called norepinephrine. Caffeine causes a release of something in the stomach called gastrin that can upset our stomach. Now, because of that, it's also been said coffee actually causes GERD, but the evidence really isn't there. There's probably other factors involved, and caffeine is just kind of getting the bad rap for GERD. GERD is where you kind of get the reflux, where you kind of burp stuff up and you get that burning taste in the back of your throat sometimes. Over 500 milligrams of caffeine per day can cause problems like this. You get all the way up to 5,000 milligrams, it can kill you. It's best to keep your caffeine intake in a day limited. Now remember, caffeine doesn't just come from coffee. It can come from things like chalk, soda drinks, energy drinks. So you have to take your total amount of caffeine in a day should not go over 500. The FDA says it's safe to be 400 or less for a normal adult. Pregnant women shouldn't have more than 200, but maybe 0 is even better because you got to remember that caffeine also can get to the baby, and if you're drinking caffeine, you might break it down. But did the baby? Is the baby going to be up and rolling? While you're trying to rest. For teenagers, no more than 100 milligrams in a day. For kids 12 and under, they shouldn't have any caffeine. So here's something to think about. In a coffee plant, caffeine is natural. Caffeine is there because the plant wants it there to ward off insects. But it's not natural in sodas. Soda companies are saying, we put it in there because it adds flavor. Well, what flavor did we say that caffeine adds to a drink? It adds bitterness. So are they really putting caffeine into sodas because they want to add this bitter flavor to this sweet drink? Caffeine is addictive. Okay, so the reason that caffeine may be put into sodas is to capture the consumer. At least in coffee, it's naturally put in there. But in something like a soda, you might not even be going back again because you like the flavor, but you want the caffeine. Kind of like bad coffee. FDA actually tried to step in and take caffeine out of sodas, but there was so much backlash from those companies that they had to reach some kind of a compromise. So FDA did limit how much caffeine sodas could actually put into the drinks, but hey, it's still there. And there's medications out there that actually use caffeine as a component of an analgesic. Excedrin, for example, has aspirin, acetaminophen, and caffeine in it. Why do they have caffeine in it? Excedrin says, hey, we put the caffeine in it because it amplifies the effect of aspirin and the acetaminophen. Okay, well, maybe it does. All right, so I won't even argue that. If the Excedrin may have its correct effect, but if you haven't had a coffee in a while and you haven't had your caffeine fix, you may actually be, taking that medicine, not really so much for the acetaminophen or the aspirin. You may be actually taking that Excedrin for the caffeine fix. So be aware that if you find yourself getting these headaches that you can't explain, there's 1,000 different reasons for headaches. But if Excedrin seems to be the only thing that touches your headaches, figure out when you're actually getting your headaches. Is it because you haven't had your coffee in a while, or you haven't had a pop in a while, or whatever? Interesting thought. I thought that I would share with you on Excedrin. Which brings me finally to the eyes. Okay. In my practice, a common theme where people come in is they come in to get their new glasses because they're getting new headaches. And actually, that's like the first checkbox you got to you check. Okay, so before you go get MRIs and CAT scans and start loading down with a whole bunch of different medicines, the very first thing you should check is your eyes. All right. Even if you see well, you might see great, you might see 20/20 far, you might see 20/20 near, but you may be getting headaches because you need a prescription, or you need to relax your muscles so they don't work so hard when you're working on a computer or something like that. Headaches are quite often from not having the proper prescription. All right. However, as I was just saying, a lot of times headaches are from caffeine withdrawal. All right. So a lot of times people go, I'm getting a headache at night after work, after I've been reading for a while. Well, if you had your caffeine in the morning and maybe you didn't get your full fix in the morning or something like that, and then you get a headache towards night, or maybe you get a headache tomorrow morning. All right. Well, you got a headache in the morning and your headache doesn't go away until you get your coffee. Well, you may be just getting your caffeine fix. In your headaches are actually coming from caffeine. You wake up in the middle of the night because you need caffeine or something like that. If you go in for an eye exam, first thing I'm going to do again is check that eye box. But I have found that a lot of times people may have they go, well, I'm not drinking pop anymore, and I've cut back on coffee, and they're not thinking about that their headaches are actually coming from that withdrawal. And every once in a while they'll have a coffee or something like that, the headache goes away, but they don't make that association. So a lot of times it's not associated because you're not getting the headache while you're drinking your coffee, because the coffee is making the headache go away, or your soda drink. So it's kind of, I would say like that check box for, hey, do you need new glasses, is my number one. And quite often check box number two is, have you come off caffeine lately? Another common problem that people have when they come into my office is an eyelid twitch. Okay, their eye jiggles a little bit on the top or on the bottom. All right, and they're wondering what that is. It could be from lack of sleep, from stress, from electrolyte imbalance, from dehydration. And it could be because, well, you've had too much coffee. You've had too much caffeine, or you haven't had enough caffeine. Quite often when the body is out of balance, it could be that you're on a new diet or a new workout plan. Your thinner muscles start to twitch. You can fix whatever the problem is. Okay, so if you don't have enough electrolytes, well, maybe you need to, have some chips and eat a banana. Get your potassium and your salt. If you're not drinking enough water, well, maybe you need to hydrate. If you're not getting enough rest, maybe you need to sleep more. If you're too stressed, well, maybe you need to go on a Caribbean cruise, or maybe you need to increase or decrease your coffee, depending on which one you're doing. If you've cut back on your coffee, or if you're away from your normal coffee routine, maybe you need to get back to it if you want to get rid of that twitch. But again, if you're trying to get rid of coffee, that's okay. The twitch isn't going to harm you. It's just something that you got to work through. Which brings me to another common problem with the eye that in the past has often been associated with coffee drinking. Because of the caffeine effect. Dry eye. All right. So let me explain dry eye first. Okay. So usually when we get dry eye, it's because we don't have enough oil in our eye. A good tear has three main components: mucin, oil, and water. All right. So mucin is the layer that kind of feeds and nourishes our cornea. It's a layer that kind of keeps bacteria and viruses out. And then water is the main component of a tear. It's what gives water, that watery feel to our eye. But then we have a layer of oil on our tears, okay? And the oil actually keeps the water from evaporating. A lot of times as time goes by, the older we get, the less oil we have, okay? Oil is produced by glands that are in our lids called meibomian glands. And when those oil glands don't produce enough oil, or maybe we're sitting, every time that we blink, we release a little bit of oil from those glands. And like, let's just say you're sitting and you're concentrating on a computer and you're not blinking. Well, if you don't blink, well, then you're not going to get that oil squirting out. So then the water is going to evaporate. And once the water evaporates, well, more water is going to pour in from a lacrimal gland. So water will pour in protection. So if our eye starts watering while we're working on a computer, it's because we forgot to blink. Okay, kind of silly, but that's true. When we're concentrated, we blink less. So we end up with a watery eye. A watery eye is a response to a dry eye. Okay, so I know that sounds weird, but again, Your eyes water because they're dry. The sprinklers turn on because there's the fire. That's how dry eye works. Okay, and it's usually because you don't have enough oil in the eye, and people get it when they get older because they don't have enough oil. Well, dry eye used to be linked to, or it was thought that we get dry eye when we drink too much coffee. Okay, why? Because caffeine is a natural diuretic. Okay, meaning that when you drink coffee, it makes you pee more. So, but that's kind of flawed though too. Okay, because when people drink coffee, we tend to drink more coffee. There's water in coffee, right? So when we drink coffee, we actually bring in more water than when we pee out. So coffee actually has a hydrating effect, right? Okay, and then also remember that coffee has antioxidants. So more recent studies show that this whole thing about the caffeine in coffee causing dehydration, which gives us dry eye, is wrong. Matter of fact, more recent studies say that drinking, coffee drinkers may actually have more moisture to their eyes than non-coffee drinkers. Okay, so you don't have to discontinue coffee if you're worried about your dry eyes. Now, that being said, that doesn't mean that everybody is equal. It doesn't mean that everybody's drinking the same type of coffee. Let's say you're drinking espresso, okay, which is loaded with caffeine, but it's only this much, fluid. Okay, well now you actually may be causing a dehydration problem. Okay, all of our bodies are different. So just because the studies say one thing, a lot of these studies are just, correlative. It's not absolute. Okay, so what works for me, caffeine, truthfully, I can have a coffee before I go to bed and it doesn't bother my sleep at all. I sleep like a rock. All right. So, but does that mean that you should do that? No. I mean, the recommendation is don't drink after noon. Don't drink after 2. Don't drink, depending on who you are and how fast you can get rid of the caffeine and how much it actually affects you, you're going to have a different response to caffeine than the next person. Okay. If you are a dry eye sufferer, my suggestion would be to test it yourself. Okay. So see if actually, if you're having a hard time with your dry eye, perhaps caffeine, in that coffee, may be the straw that kind of broke the camel's back. It's that last thing that makes your dry eye even worse. I don't see any problem with, you testing it for yourself to see if discontinuing coffee helps your dry eye. Okay. I mean, or maybe you want to test it like a medicine and see if it actually helps your dry eye and you actually get more moisture. I don't think there's any harm either way. Dry eye sufferers suffer. And if there's a simple answer like discontinue coffee or add coffee to the list to help, your troubles, go for it. The next eye problem that I'd like to talk about is age-related macular degeneration. Age-related macular degeneration is the leading cause of blindness in the United States over the age of 65. All right. So what is macular degeneration? So let's break it down. So light's supposed to come into the eye and focus at a point in the back of the eye called the fovea. The fovea is a little tiny point in the back of the eye in the middle of a zone called the macula. So that's where our main central vision is. So light's supposed to focus there, and then it is sent by way of nerves out the back of the eye back to the brain. So all of our central vision is jammed into the macula, with the very center point of the macula being the fovea. All right. So if we lose that fovea, that's where we lose our finest tuned vision. But the macula, the surrounding area, is also the area around our main central point, the fovea. All right. So macular degeneration, puts our eye in high danger of vision being lost. So what happens with macular degeneration as time goes by, we have these little rocks, drusen, that grow underneath the retina, grow underneath the macula. And it's kind of like rocks that might grow underneath a rug would cause degeneration to the carpet. We would call that carpet degeneration. Well, if you got little rocks growing underneath the macula, then we would call that macular degeneration, because the rocks are going to cause degeneration to the tissue over top of it. Well, what if there was a way to slow down the growth of those rocks? Well, there is. Matter of fact, we there's studies that show it. When we find that people have early stages of macular degeneration, we say, hey, take these vitamins. Okay, and you may have heard of them. There's vitamins out there called Preservision that are pretty popular from Bausch and Lomb that have antioxidants in them. Antioxidants like zeaxanthin, the carotenoids, those actually are take free radicals out of the macula area so that drusen can't grow. All right. Again, antioxidants. What else was I talking about? I was talking about the polyphenols in coffee are strong antioxidants. Okay. Now, zeaxanthin and the carotenoids are more, specific for the macula, but they're still providing that same protection to that area, that neuroprotective zone of the back of the eye, so that these drusen don't form. Okay, so we protect the retina the best we can, the macula the best we can, by saying take these supplemental vitamins or eat a whole bunch of green leafy vegetables because they're loaded with it too. All right. But what we also say to people that have macular, we say eat well, drink well, be well. Do all the right things to keep your body healthy to avoid macular from coming. Okay, and another thing that we say don't do is don't smoke. Like, number one thing that you can do to amplify your problems associated with macular is smoke. Well, what does smoking do? Okay, besides cut down your vascular flow and hurt your lungs and all that stuff, smoking also releases positive charges into the body. Okay, smoking adds oxidants. All right, and we know when we add oxidants, well, what's it going to do to the macula? You're going to have a greater accumulation of drusen, and it's going to amplify. So when the first thing that we tell people is we say, okay, here's these vitamins and don't smoke. Stop smoking. If you want your macular to progress, then keep smoking. If you want it to stop smoking. So besides taking vitamins, besides taking antioxidants, we say stop adding oxidants. Well, I think that's where coffee comes in here. Now, as optometrists and ophthalmologists, we don't tell people to go drink coffee if you have macular. Okay, there's no studies showing that there's a benefit there. But if you smoke, you're not smoking in the eye, you're smoking in your lungs. Well, if you can drink coffee, and coffee adds oxidants, coffee is an antioxidant, and if smoking adds oxidants, well, what if those antioxidants can slow down those oxidants from getting to the eye in the first place? Okay. Now, again, I'm not suggesting that that's an answer, but what I am saying is that in this case, in macular degeneration, even though coffee does not play a role, in a typical setting here for macular, it does have an antioxidant activity. So theoretically, on paper, it could. There is, there's definitely we have these associations with a neuroprotective mechanism of antioxidants with to protect against cancer and diabetes and cardiovascular disease associated with antioxidants. Well, maybe there's some kind of benefit, especially for somebody who's smoking, that is actually having coffee to kind of combat that, that smoking effect. Again, nothing proven. I don't want to go there and, go on the record as saying that it absolutely will. And I'm not trying to tell you to take up coffee. But I'm saying that you don't have to stop coffee if you have macular, because there's no science that says that you have to not drink coffee with macular. Matter of fact, I think if anything, it's going to be neuroprotective to your macula area. And the last eye problem that I want to talk about associated with coffee is glaucoma. All right. So remember I said light's supposed to come into the back of the eye and focus the back of the eye on the fovea in the center of an area called the macula. And then the macula sends the information back to the brain. Well, the way that the macula can send the information back to the brain is it has to run wires out the back of the eye. Okay. Nerves out of the back of the eye. Collectively, all the nerves that leave the back of the eye form the optic nerve. Glaucoma is the disease of that nerve. Okay. glaucoma is a degenerative disease of our optic nerve. You may have heard of glaucoma being associated with high pressure, right? You check your eye pressure to see if you have glaucoma. Oh, my pressures are up. I must have glaucoma. No, that's not accurate. High pressure does not equal glaucoma, okay? High pressure is associated. High pressure is the leading, risk factor for developing glaucoma, but high pressure does not equal glaucoma. Glaucoma is actually degeneration of the nerve. High pressure just happens in the front chamber of the eye. Now, the front chamber is well spaced. It's very separate from the nerve, and we're not even sure why high pressure actually causes damage to the nerve. Okay, this might as well be North America, and that's Australia. They're just separated. They don't touch each other. But somehow we know that if we control pressure, we can slow damage to the nerve. All right, and the question is that, hey, does drinking coffee increase pressure? So there can be a short-term increase in pressure associated from coffee, but nothing that actually is going to cause an increased risk of developing glaucoma. Okay, so in most people, glaucoma is not a concern for coffee drinkers. The only time that we have a concern is when somebody has a family history or has a high genetic risk for developing glaucoma. When there is an association there, then your risk of developing or having developing glaucoma goes up as a coffee drinker. There's an association there. We're not even sure if the association is legit, but there is an association, a correlation between people who drink coffee who have a higher risk in the family going on to develop glaucoma. So if you're a high risk, if you have high genetic risk or you have family members that actually have glaucoma, then you may not want to drink coffee. This would be something that you should talk to your eye doctor about, okay? Because your pressures might be way low. Your risk might be not even on the charts, okay? But if your doctor looks at you and says, yeah, maybe we should do something, but we don't want to start treating medically quite yet, let's do something else. Can you get yourself healthy? One of those things that you might want to do to get yourself healthy as well, stop drinking coffee. But on the other hand, too, remember, coffee has all these antioxidants, and coffee is supposed to be neuroprotective. So, is there some type of protection there from the antioxidant effect of coffee for the optic nerve? Okay. Well, again, maybe not, because we also know that it can reduce blood flow to potentially, coffee might reduce blood flow to that optic nerve as well. Okay. We think that there's a vascular component to glaucoma as well. So though we might have this antioxidant neuroprotective effect going on, we also may have this vascular negative effect going on, and that may outweigh the positive effect, and that might be why people who have a higher genetic risk or family history may have more problems. Again, we don't exactly know. We just know that there is an association, and if you do have that genetic component or that higher family risk, it might be one of those things that say, don't drink coffee. And as a final reminder, remember all these health benefits that are suggested that you can receive from coffee and its antioxidants are best served black. So don't add milk, don't add sugar or artificial sweeteners to your coffee. You're just going to deprive yourself of those potential benefits. So to enjoy coffee black, make sure you have specialty coffee. Okay. Don't forget to visit my new friends at White Pine Coffee Roasters at whitepinecoffee.com, and don't forget to use my code to get your special discount when you order from them. Thank you, Brad and Bryan, for all the hospitality when I visited you, and thanks for I hope that this video serves you well. Please show Brad and Bryan that you enjoyed the show and you enjoyed what they did for us here by ordering from them at their site, whitepinecoffee.com. And if you've come this far, it means you either enjoy the show or you're DJ. Either way, I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Please like and subscribe if you haven't done so yet. Please post a comment saying what you think about it, or correct me on something that I said wrong. Something that'll anything that'll help me or help others viewing. I appreciate it. And again, thanks for watching. We'll see you soon.
This is a dried coffee cherry Cascara. We make a tisane or a fruit steeped beverage out of it. Very high in antioxidants per our discussion. This is one of the healthiest things in coffee to drink. You're not likely to find it many places. A lot of good roasters will occasionally have it on their websites. In the summer, we brew a kind of an iced tea version of it, and then in the winter, we add some spices and serve it hot. And then storage wise, we really don't recommend freezers and fridges too much. If you can go down like the Reddit rabbit hole of home barista forums, and yes, there are people using freezers to good use, but those are vacuum sealed, extremely low temperatures, zero moisture freezers that are only storing coffee. If you want to store that at home, buy it fresh, don't buy too much, and try to use it within a month. 2 weeks, 3 weeks is best. You don't want to store it in anything glass. You want to keep it in a bag with a valve and a seal on it, or even preferably in a airtight container that has some kind of valve on it that lets you press out the extra air inside of it. Because it's not a struggle. It's just a reality of the situation where when we have new customers come in and they want a new experience, like we can give them the craziest cup of coffee they've ever had. But if it's too different, they're going to run away and probably never come back. Yeah. So we need to find out where they're at currently and then give them the tools so that, and palate development is a giant part of the conversation as well. And then we haven't even talked about water quality or what's in the water. That's a giant part of brewing as well. So that's a whole different discussion. But
let's have that discussion.
Never distilled water. That is, we still have people occasionally that use distilled water to brew coffee, and it's not going to work. There's no minerals, there's no chemicals in the water to carry across the water barrier to flavor the coffee. This is we're in 2024 now, so there's been some new companies and some new tests and research done where the TDS or total dissolved solids and the hardness related to that of the water, the brew water. You can start with some decent spring water. That's good. Most tap water, at least get a filter, a basic filter at the very least. Why White Pine Coffee Roasters? We offer a lot of value for the quality. We have a wide set of offerings. I don't want to call us like a gateway roaster, as in I don't think you're ever going to outgrow our offerings. We have a lot of nice offerings, especially like towards the holidays, gift sets, like some really nice esoteric offerings that are pretty rare. You're not going to find a lot of other places, but I think we're a great starting point. We always are going to provide good value for what you are receiving, and we're big on education, as you can tell. So if you have an issue, you want to get a hold of us, not even an issue, just a general question. You want to learn more. I geek out on this. I'm a lifelong learner. I like teaching people, helping people grow their palate. And a lot of it is the simple stuff. This story could apply to about at least 100 of our customers right now. They'll, kind of peek their head in the first day in the cafe or at an open house or an event we're at, and kind of, cautiously step in and, they'll get 2/3 of a black cup, and then they'll add a bunch of cream and a bunch of sugar to it the first time, and they'll be like, oh, this tastes pretty good. And we don't put the heavy press on them right away. We'll wait for them to show up 2 or 3 times before we either suggest maybe do you want to try a sample black or something like that. And then there's the natural progression where they'll, 3rd time in, maybe a little less cream, 5th time in, almost no cream. And this happens almost once a week. By the time someone's in here for the 5th, 6th, 7th time, they literally walk in the door, hands up, I drink black coffee. They're so proud of the fact that they got to the point where they're drinking black coffee and there's some sweetness to it. It's not as bitter as they think it's going to be. It's smooth on the palate. If it's well roasted and has good genetics and all that, it's not going to give them any, upset stomach or any kind of health issues related to that. In fact, one of the reasons we're sitting down is to discuss how healthy coffee actually is. So once you get rid of the commodity grade issues of the health, I don't want to say health concerns, but they're not as beneficial. and the learning curve is pretty steep for someone who's used to the commodity scenario. So what I would say to them is, we're very nice people. We're very welcoming. We're big on education. We want them to experience it. We honestly think their lives will be better with specialty coffee in it. It's kind of sounds highfalutin for someone who's running a coffee roastery, but I can say we make people's lives a little bit better when they switch from a commodity grade coffee that they have to doctor up with all kinds of cream and sugar to drinking a nice, 1 or 2 cups of black coffee a day that's specialty grade, that's well prepared, well roasted. There is a big difference. And then the other thing I would say is more towards the someone's pocketbook, right? Usually people are paying a pretty good price for not great coffee anyway. So we definitely have beans that cost a lot more than your average cup of coffee, that's for sure. However, if you are just comparing per unit dollar per the quality, I don't want to rip on big chains, because without, like, say, the big green giant, small little companies like us may never have existed in the first place. However, let's move on from that. Let's develop our awareness a little bit and realize that if you're spending $5 with us versus $5 with somebody else, I would say a lot more of that $5 from us went into the actual coffee than it did with a larger chain competitor. And I think you just get more value for the liquid ounce with our coffees and other small independent roasters as well. I don't think we're unique in that characteristic. We definitely focus on value. We're a Northern Oakland County, Michigan roaster in the Midwest. We definitely focus on value for the price point. So that's locally, that's one thing we definitely focus on. But for anyone watching outside of that geography, you're still going to get tremendous value for, per ounce of bean or per ounce of brewed coffee in the specialty realm, unless you're chasing extreme exotic cool stuff, which I could talk about all day, but isn't necessarily the focus here. But you can get some crazy amazing coffees that have flavor profiles as nuanced and even more than your best cup of red wine that you've ever had. And we will have at least once a week someone have one of our more experimental or elevated cups, and they can't even believe that it's coffee. Sometimes it's like, this tastes like fruit tea. Sometimes people are like, I never even knew coffee could taste like this. There's a lot of that, especially when it comes to the naturals, because the fruit notes that can come out of a well done naturally processed coffee, again, the flavor notes that are available. And onophiles and wine lovers don't like when we say stuff like this, but the taste profile kit available in brewed coffee is more than that of a red wine, and those are potential flavor notes. I'm not saying they're all in there at the same time. Those are the potentials.